The morning a courtroom decided who my grandmother had really loved, my mother sat 2 tables away from me in a navy blazer she'd clearly bought for the occasion, smiling like the money was already spent. She had that look I knew from childhood, the one she wore right before she talked her way out of something. Chin lifted, mouth soft, eyes doing math. I kept my hands flat on the table so nobody could see them shake. I already knew the shape of what my grandmother had left. Almost everything to me. A single dollar and a note to my mother. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, not even her lawyer, was what my grandmother had tucked into the very last line of that will. My mother leaned across the aisle while the clerk was still shuffling papers and whispered, close enough that I could smell her perfume. "When this is done, you're going to do the right thing and split it. You owe me that." I didn't answer. I looked straight ahead at the judge, a small woman with reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair, and I let my mother believe she'd already won. She had no idea my grandmother had left one last thing with her name on it, buried at the bottom of the page like a hook under still water. The judge turned to the final paragraph, adjusted her glasses, and the whole room went so quiet I could hear the radiator ticking. And then she read the line, and my mother's face lost every drop of color before the sentence even finished. That was the second I understood how far my grandmother had gone to protect me, and how ugly the fight over her money was really about to get. If you want to know how a granddaughter turned her own mother's greed into the last thing she ever expected, stick with me to the end of this. And do me a favor and hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because you are not going to want to miss where this goes. Long before that hearing, my life had already been cut clean in half. There was the version of me that had my grandmother, and the version of me that didn't. With her, everything made sense. She raised me in a 2-bedroom house on Marrow Lake, in a town in Michigan so small the diner closed if the owner had a dentist appointment. I called her Gran. Everybody in town called her Miss Opal. My mother handed me off to her when I was 7. I don't remember it being dramatic. There was no scene, no tears. Just a Sunday where my mother packed the car and told me she and her boyfriend were chasing something better in Phoenix, and that Gran would have me for a while. A while turned into my whole childhood. My mother would surface every couple of years, usually broke, usually with a new man, usually needing something. She missed my school plays. She missed the year I made the honor roll. She missed my high school graduation, though she did text me a thumbs-up emoji 3 days later. Gran never missed a thing. She sat front row at every recital in her good cardigan, clapping like I was the only kid on the stage. When I got scared of storms, she'd sit on the edge of my bed and name every tree we could hear in the wind. She taught me how to balance a checkbook at the kitchen table when I was 11. She taught me how to read a used car ad and spot the lie in it. She'd tap the side of her head and say, "Sweetheart, don't listen to what people tell you at funerals. Watch who shows up on a plain old Tuesday." I thought she was just being folksy. I didn't understand she was training me for my own family. Gran wasn't flashy about money, which is exactly why nobody knew how much she had. She'd been a 4th-grade teacher for 31 years, drove the same tan station wagon until it practically dissolved, clipped coupons, and grew half of what we ate in a lopsided greenhouse out back. What people didn't see was that she'd started buying a little stock every single paycheck since the 70s, reinvesting the dividends, never touching it. She'd inherited a small piece of land from her own parents, and sold it right before the market turned. She read the financial pages the way some people read scripture. By the time she died, that frugal, coupon-clipping schoolteacher was sitting on $3,720,000, and she'd told exactly one person the real number: me. The last time I saw her, we were at her kitchen table eating tomato soup out of the chipped bowls she refused to throw away. She looked more tired than usual, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She set her spoon down and said, "Colette, if anything happens to me, you remember what I taught you. You are not obligated to hand your life over to somebody just because they gave birth to you." I laughed and told her to quit being morbid. She just patted my hand and said, "I'm not being morbid, I'm being prepared." 9 days later, my phone rang before the sun was up. I saw an unfamiliar number with a Corliss area code and my stomach dropped before I even answered. A man's voice, gentle and unsteady, asked, "Is this Colette Hale?" and then told me my grandmother had passed in her sleep. "Peacefully," said. The neighbor had found her when the paper piled up. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not right then. Something in me just clicked off, quiet like a lamp. I wrote down the details he gave me, thanked him, and sat on the edge of my bed in the gray light listening to myself breathe. The first call I was supposed to make was to my mother. I sat there a long time staring at her name in my phone, remembering every birthday she'd forgotten, and the time she told me she couldn't spare a dime for my community college books while posting photos from a resort in Cabo. But she was still my mother, or the closest thing I had to one. I made the call. When she picked up, her voice came out warm and syrupy, like we talked all the time. I told her Gran was gone. There was a pause, just a beat, a tiny crack, and then she said, "Oh, sweetie, that's awful. Curtis and I will drive up right away. We'll help you handle everything, everything." That word sat in my chest like a stone long after we hung up. Underneath the grief, something colder started to move. My mother wasn't coming back because she missed me. She was coming back because a death in the family sounded like a payday. I packed a bag with shaking hands and drove the 6 hours north to bury the only person who'd ever truly shown up for me. I didn't know yet that I was also driving straight into a war. They arrived the next afternoon in a leased SUV that cost more than Gran's house. My mother stepped out in heels and a camel coat, though the sky was spitting cold rain and the driveway was gravel. My stepfather Curtis came behind her, carrying nothing but his phone and a leather portfolio, like he'd shown up for a closing instead of a funeral. He'd been in and out of consulting and wealth strategy for as long as I'd known him, which mostly meant he was between things and always talking about a deal. My mother wrapped me in a hug before I could step back. "Oh, honey," she breathed into my hair, and her perfume hit me the way it always did, sharp, expensive, the smell I'd once associated with the rare good day and now only connected to being lied to. We went inside. For maybe 10 minutes it almost felt normal. My mother drifted around the living room touching picture frames and sighing at photos she wasn't in. Curtis lowered himself into Gran's recliner, the one nobody sat in but her, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek. Then he said, casual as asking about the weather, "So, has anybody mentioned a will yet?" "Not even an hour in." "Her attorney called," I said, keeping my voice flat. "There's a reading in a few days. We're all supposed to be there." My mother and Curtis traded a look. Fast, but I caught it. Bright and hungry, like two people who'd just seen the same slot machine light up. "Good," my mother said. "Your grandmother was very comfortable. It's important all of this gets handled properly." Properly. Another loaded word. Curtis leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Colette, I want you to hear me out. Settling an estate this size is complicated. There's estate tax, there's probate, there's investment decisions that can cost you 6 figures if you get them wrong. You're 29. You take care of dogs and cats for a living, which is wonderful, but you don't have the background for this. It'd be smart to let me manage the assets for you. At least until you're on your feet." My jaw went tight. "Gran taught me plenty about money." "That's sweet," my mother cut in, laying her hand over mine like a lid. "But a hobby isn't experience. Curtis has built portfolios for actual clients. We'd be doing it for family, for free." Translation: "Give us the keys." I slid my hand out from under hers. "We don't even know what she left yet. Can we plan her funeral before we plan her money?" Irritation flickered across my mother's face before she smoothed it back down. "Of course, I just don't want anyone taking advantage of you. Young women in your position get eaten alive." Young women in my position, as if she hadn't been the very first person to walk out the door when I needed her. We spent the afternoon on logistics, the funeral home, the flowers, the obituary. Every time a cost came up, my mother would wave it off with, "The estate will cover that," in a tone so easy, so settled, like her hands were already in the drawer. That night, after they left for the motel out by the highway, I sat alone at Gran's kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold. Her chair across from me sat empty, but I could practically hear her. Watch who shows up on a plain old Tuesday. And I thought about how, in one single afternoon, my mother had said the words manage and handle and properly more times than she'd said my name. They hadn't driven 6 hours to grieve with me. They'd driven 6 hours to take inventory. The funeral was at the little Methodist church Gran had gone to for 40 years. The place was packed. Former students, now grown with kids of their own, filled the pews. The man who ran the hardware store, the woman she'd carpooled with since the Carter administration. Half the town had a story about Miss Opal quietly paying for someone's groceries or fixing a kid's bike. My mother arrived 8 minutes late in a tailored black dress, her grief performed to perfection, and sat in the front row close enough to the casket to look devoted in any photo. Curtis sat beside her, scanning the room the way an appraiser scans a house. Twice during the service I watched her check her phone under the hymnal. When it was my turn to speak, my hands were shaking around a folded index card I'd rewritten a dozen times. I set it down on the podium and never looked at it once. My grandmother never measured family by blood, I heard myself say. She measured it by who showed up. She used to tell me that love isn't the pretty things people say when it's too late to matter, it's the boring stuff. The rides to school, the soup on a Tuesday, the people who stay when there's nothing in it for them. I saw my mother's shoulders go rigid. She taught me that money doesn't change who you are, it just turns the volume up on who you already were. And she told me, over and over, to stand up for myself even if I had to stand up alone. My throat closed for a second, but I pushed through. So, I'm going to honor her the way she'd want, by protecting what she built and refusing to let anybody twist her memory into an argument. I didn't look at my parents. I didn't have to. I could feel their eyes on the side of my face like a heat lamp. Afterward, in the little fellowship hall with the coffee urns and the folding tables, I overheard them. I'd stepped behind the coat rack to catch my breath, and there they were, hissing at each other on the other side. "You're panicking," Curtis was saying low. "Once the will's read, we deal with reality. And what if reality is she left the whole thing to the girl?" My mother snapped. "You know how she was. She never forgave us for the loan." "Then we contest it," Curtis said. "Undue influence, diminished capacity, something. No judge likes seeing that kind of money land on a 29-year-old vet tech. We paint her as unstable. She had that breakdown in college. The withdrawal semester, the therapist. We make them see somebody who can't handle it, who probably manipulated a lonely old woman." My stomach turned over. So that was it. Not grief, not goodbye. A strategy. For one long second I was 12 again, hiding at the top of the stairs, listening to them argue about who got stuck with me over Christmas. I stepped around the coat rack. They froze. "Half the town is still here," I said quietly. "If you're going to talk about me like I'm not in the room, at least wait until you're in the parking lot." Color climbed up my mother's neck. "Colette, that is not, we're worried about you." "That's all funny," I said. "Being taken advantage of is exactly what I'm worried about too." We stared at each other, and I swear something in the air between us hardened into a line. "Tomorrow," Curtis said finally, cool again, buttoning his jacket, "we'll meet the attorney, we'll get clarity, and we'll make decisions together." Together, as if that word had ever meant anything safe in our family. I nodded, just to end it, and walked back to the people who'd actually loved her. By the time the last car left the lot, I'd made up my mind. If they wanted a fight over Gran's legacy, they were about to find out I wasn't the anxious, please don't be mad girl they'd left on a porch 22 years ago. The attorney's office was in a converted brick house on the square, all quiet carpet and heavy books. Mr. Cabrera was a compact man in his 60s with kind eyes and a handshake like a vice. On his desk sat a framed photo of him and Gran at some Rotary Club dinner, both of them laughing. Somehow that picture steadied me more than anything else in the room. "Thank you all for coming," he said, folding his hands. "I know this is hard. Miss Opal was a dear friend and a very clear-minded client. She left detailed instructions." My mother gave him her church smile. "We just want to honor her wishes." I almost laughed out loud. Mr. Cabrera opened a folder, slid out the pages, and started reading. The formalities first: full name, date, the sound mind language. Then he said my name. "To my granddaughter Colette, who stayed when everyone else chose distance, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes my home, my brokerage and retirement accounts, and all bank holdings, currently valued at approximately $3,720,000. The number filled the room like water. I knew it was coming, and it still knocked the wind out of me. My mother's folded hands twitched in her lap. Curtis's polite mask slipped for half a second, and I saw the calculator behind his eyes light up. Mr. Cabrera went on. "It is my wish that Colette use these resources to build a stable, honest life. Education, security, and the freedom to never depend on people who treated her as optional. She earned my trust the slow way, and I trust her completely." I pressed my knuckles to my mouth. "And to my daughter," Mr. Cabrera continued, and his voice didn't change at all, "I leave the sum of $1. This is not an oversight. It is a decision I have made carefully and repeatedly over many years." The word landed like a slap. $1, my mother repeated as if she'd misheard. "One? That can't be right." She knew how hard we've had it. "She cannot cut me out over $1, Mrs. Vaughn," Mr. Cabrera said, not unkindly. "Your mother revised this will 14 months ago. She was very specific about her reasons. My job is only to carry them out." Her face went a deep, blotchy red. "So 30-some years of being her daughter is worth $1 to her." Curtis jumped in smoothly. "This is wildly imbalanced. How do we know she wasn't suppressed? She was elderly. She lived alone with a young woman who stood to benefit. That's textbook undue influence." We may need to have this reviewed by a court. There it was. The angle right on schedule. Mr. Cabrera adjusted his glasses. Your mother anticipated that this decision might be challenged. There's a provision at the end of the document addressing exactly that. For now, I'll only say this. Contesting the will would be very unwise for you. Are you threatening us with a dead woman's words? My mother said, half rising. I'm informing you of a legal consequence she chose to put in place, he answered evenly. If you move forward, it will be enforced. I glanced at the last page. He had it face down on the blotter, one hand resting over the bottom third, like he didn't want anyone reading ahead. Something was down there, something they didn't know about. My mother turned on me. You're not seriously going to let this stand, are you, Colette? That's family money. It belongs to all of us. For one heartbeat, the old me stirred, the girl who'd have done anything to make her stop being mad. Then I heard Gran at the kitchen table. Love and obligation are two different things, sweetheart. I'm going to do what she asked me to do, I said. I'm going to use it to build a life. I'm not signing anything over. Curtis's voice dropped, soft and sharp as a paper cut. Then you leave us no choice, we'll challenge it. We'll prove she was manipulated, my mother said, breathing hard. We'll prove you're not fit to handle this. You won't get away with it. I held her eyes. I'm not the one going against what she wanted. We walked out in 3 directions. They were already on their phones in the parking lot before I reached the sidewalk. I stood in the cold and looked up at the pale sky and felt the ground shift under me. I'd just inherited more money than I'd ever imagined and declared war on the only family I had left. The lawsuit came on a Tuesday, which I found almost funny. A thick envelope from the county court, my name in crisp official type. For one stupid second I thought it was something from the bank. Then I saw the words. My mother and her husband were formally contesting the will, claiming Gran had been of unsound mind and unduly influenced by me when she left me the estate. They were asking the court to throw out her final wishes and reinstate an older version, or failing that, to divide everything under Michigan's intestacy laws. I stood in the driveway with the wind cutting across my face and read it 3 times. At the bottom were their signatures, side by side, neat as anything. It felt like being given away all over again, except this time they'd put it in writing. I took the papers straight to Mr. Cabrera. He read them with nothing more than a tired sigh. I expected this, he said. Your mother left my office very angry. Some people never learn to sit with a consequence. What happens if they win? I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. If they succeed, the court could revert to a prior will, or if none qualifies, distribute the estate under intestate succession. Either way, your share would be cut down significantly, likely split with her. He let that settle, then leaned forward. But your grandmother was not a naive woman, Colette. She planned for exactly this. He tapped the folder. Her will contains a no-contest clause, a very strong one. She asked that the full text only be read into the record if a contest was actually filed. Well, he tapped the papers on his desk. It's been filed. A chill went up the back of my neck. How strong is strong? Strong enough that when the judge reaches the final section, he said, your mother is going to understand precisely how seriously Opal took this. And I suspect she'll regret triggering it for the rest of her life. I thought about her in this very office, red-faced, insisting she wouldn't accept $1 as her worth. I thought about Curtis already rehearsing how to make me look crazy in front of a judge. Can they actually convince a court I controlled her? I asked. She's the one who taught me everything. She took care of me. Courts don't like to void wills without hard proof, he said, and your grandmother left a great deal of hard proof. We have medical evaluations from the week she signed. We have decades of meticulous records. He opened a smaller folder and drew out a sealed flash drive in a labeled evidence bag. And we have this. What is it? A video, he said. She recorded it the same afternoon she signed the revised will. She wanted the court to be able to see her and hear her, in case anyone ever claimed she wasn't thinking straight. She explains her reasons in her own words. He set it down between us like something breakable. You'll need a litigation attorney who specializes in estate disputes. I'll refer you to the best one I know. But I need you to be sure, Colette. Contesting a will is ugly. Defending one isn't much prettier. Whatever's left of your relationship with your mother is not going to survive this. I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. What relationship? He studied me a long moment, then nodded. All right. Then we fight. A week later I was sitting across from a woman named Ms. Okafor in a glass and steel office 2 towns over, everything sleek and modern. She was calm in a way that made me want to just hand her my nerves and let her hold them. She read the complaint fast, pen tapping. "They're arguing undue influence," she said. "They'll try to say you isolated her, poisoned her against them, steered her decisions. Our job is to show the opposite, that you're simply the one who stayed while they stayed gone." She looked up. "I need you to be honest with me. Did you ever bring up her money? Hint about the will? Suggest she leave things to you?" "No," I said. Honestly, I avoided it. She was the one who kept bringing it up. She kept saying she wanted things set right in case something happened. Good. Juries and judges can smell sincerity and they can smell the opposite. She flipped a page. "The fact that your mother and stepfather have a documented history of financial trouble is going to work heavily against them. You know about that?" She nodded. "Mr. Cabrera turned over records your grandmother kept, loans to your mother that were never repaid, an investment scheme your stepfather pushed that she refused to touch. She kept receipts on everything, more than most people half her age." I pictured Gran at the kitchen table with her yellow legal pads and her careful handwriting, every dollar accounted for. She hadn't been paranoid. She'd been building a case for years. The next few weeks turned my life into a loop of work, phone calls, and memories I'd have paid to forget. Ms. Okafor had me collect everything. Old texts from my mother, voicemails, the emails where she'd promised to visit and never came. She had me write a timeline of everything they'd missed. Recitals, birthdays, the graduation. It felt petty, listing it out like charges on an invoice, and I said so. "It's not petty," she said. "It's a pattern." They pulled away. "Your grandmother stepped in, you became her whole world and she became yours. That's not manipulation. On their side, that's abandonment." On the bad nights when I couldn't sleep, I'd open the envelope Gran had left with Mr. Cabrera to give me when things got loud. Inside was a letter in her looping cursive. "Colette, if you're reading this, then people are arguing about things I can't answer for myself anymore. I'm sorry it came to that, but I'm not surprised. I have watched how your mother treats responsibility her whole life, and I have watched how you treat it. I chose accordingly. You are not greedy for keeping what I gave you. You are not cruel for protecting it. You do not have to burn yourself down to keep anybody else warm. And if they come after you, remember this. I'm the one they're really angry at, not you. Don't let their guilt put on your face. All my love, Gran." I read that letter until the folds went soft as cloth. My mother didn't call me once during those weeks. Everything came through lawyers now, and somehow that hurt more than a fight would have. Sometimes I tried to picture her as a little girl in Gran's kitchen, back when maybe she was still soft. But the woman on the other side of this case wasn't that girl. She was someone who believed she was owed whatever she could reach, even if she had to pry it out of her own daughter's hands. 2 months later, we were back in the courthouse where I'd first heard the number. Only this time we weren't there to listen. We were there to win. The hearing room had high ceilings and a raised bench, and the air smelled like paper and cold coffee. My mother sat at one table with her lawyer and Curtis. I sat at the other with Ms. Okafor and Mr. Cabrera. She didn't look at me once. The judge, Judge Vela, sharp-eyed behind those reading glasses, glanced over the file with a face that gave away nothing. "We're here on a petition to contest the last will and testament of Opal Merrick," she said. Petitioners allege the decedent lacked capacity and was unduly influenced by her granddaughter, the primary beneficiary. The estate maintains the will is valid and seeks enforcement of all provisions, including a no-contest clause. Opening statements. My mother's attorney went first, all practiced concern. He talked about a sudden change in the will, a vulnerable widow, a young relative with emotional leverage who'd wedged herself between a grandmother and her only child. He didn't say my name often. When he did, it came out like an accusation. Miss Okafor's opening was short. "Your Honor, the evidence will show Opal Merrick was clear, consistent, and deliberate. She wasn't manipulated. She was disappointed. She changed her will not out of confusion but out of clarity. Clarity about who actually showed up for her when it counted. And she anticipated this exact challenge and made her position unmistakable, both in writing and on camera." When she sat down, my mother looked rattled for the first time. The day blurred into questions and exhibits. Mr. Cabrera testified first, describing Gran's visits, the care she took with her documents, the way she talked about her daughter and about me. "She told me plainly," he said, "that she did not want her daughter or son-in-law anywhere near Colette's inheritance. Her words were, 'If they come after her when I'm gone, I want the law standing between them.'" My mother's attorney objected. The judge let it stand. Then came the medical records evaluation confirming Gran had been fully competent that week. Her doctor testified by video, tired but firm. Her memory had some gaps, the doctor said, but she understood her finances, her family, and exactly what her decisions meant. She knew what she was doing. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand on legs that didn't feel like mine, swore to tell the truth, and gripped the edge of the wooden chair until my knuckles whitened. Miss Okafor walked me through it gently. How I'd come to live with Gran, how she'd filled every space my parents left empty, how she'd never once pushed me toward her money. When she talked about the estate, what did she say? Miss Okafor asked. She said she wanted to make up for what I lost, I answered. Not just money. Time, stability. She said the money wasn't a prize for being perfect. It was a fence, so I'd never have to depend on people who'd already proven I couldn't. Did you ever ask her to change her will? No. Did you ever threaten to leave her or withhold care if she didn't? I almost laughed at how backward that was. No, if anyone was ever at risk of being left, it was me. She was all I had. On cross, my mother's lawyer went after the softest part of me. He brought up the semester I'd withdrawn from college when the anxiety got so bad I couldn't leave my apartment. He brought up my old therapist. Isn't it true, he said, that during this period you were emotionally unstable, that you leaned on your grandmother heavily, that you depended on her for housing, money, and support? Yes, I said, because my parents weren't there. He didn't like that answer. By the time the judge called a recess, my throat was raw. I leaned against the cool marble wall in the hallway, ears ringing. Across the corridor, my mother stood with her lawyer, her face tight and pale. For 1 second, her eyes found mine, and there was something in them that almost looked like fear. Then she turned away. When we filed back in, the judge cleared her throat. We'll move to the remaining exhibits, she said. This includes a recording prepared by the decedent, and, if warranted, the final provision of the will. Her gaze swept both tables. I'd suggest everyone pay close attention. What comes next will determine whether this matter continues or ends today. My heart slammed against my ribs. The lights dimmed a little as a screen came down along the wall. The clerk fiddled with a laptop, and then Gran's face filled the screen, slightly grainy but unmistakably her. She was sitting at Mr. Cabrera's desk in her good blue cardigan, the date stamp matching the day she signed. My chest caved in just looking at her. State your name for the record, Mr. Cabrera's voice said from behind the camera. Opal Merrick, Gran said, steady and dry. Born September 3rd, 1943. And before you ask, yes, I know what day it is, I know what I own, and I know exactly what I'm doing. A few people in the gallery actually smiled. I'm making this recording because I'm not a fool, she said, folding her hands on the desk the way she always did. I've just signed a new will. I've left almost everything to my granddaughter Colette. I've left my daughter $1. That was not an impulse, that was 30 years in the making. I saw my mother flinch out of the corner of my eye. My daughter and I have been strangers for a long time, Gran went on, looking straight into the lens. That happens. What I can't forgive is that when I needed her, and when her own child needed her, she chose herself every single time. Vacations instead of visits, new cars instead of paying me back, excuses instead of showing up. She paused. I don't hate her, but I don't trust her with money. I've watched it run through her fingers her whole life, and I've watched that man she married chase every shortcut there is. I bailed them out more than once while I was living. I will not do it from my grave. Then her face softened into the look I'd have known anywhere. Colette, if you're watching this, I want you to remember that I did this because I believe in you. Not because you asked. You never once asked. You're the one who drove me to my appointments and sat with me when my hip was bad and actually listened when I rambled. You gave more than you ever took. And I am so proud of you it hurts. I was crying openly now, not caring who saw. To whoever's reviewing this, Gran added, sitting up straight, her voice going flint hard, I state clearly that I am of sound mind. I understand what I have and who my heirs are, and I am freely choosing to leave what I built to the person who earned it, and not to the people who assumed they were entitled to it. She gave a small shrug. If that makes them angry, that's their problem. It doesn't make me confused. The screen went dark. The silence in that room had weight. Judge Vela looked down at her papers for a long moment. When she spoke, her tone had shifted. The court has heard from the drafting attorney, reviewed medical records from the decedent's physician, heard from the primary beneficiary, and viewed the decedent's own recorded statement, she said. Taken together, the evidence strongly supports that Opal Merrick was competent and acted of her own free will. She turned toward my mother's table. The petitioners have offered no credible proof of undue influence. Disappointment with a will is not evidence of manipulation. Distance in a relationship is not proof of isolation. My mother's lawyer shifted in his seat. Your Honor, if we may, you'll have your moment, she said. But there is one more matter before this court. The no contest clause. My mother's fingers went white around the edge of the table. The judge picked up the enlarged copy of the will and flipped to the final page. The same sheet Mr. Cabrera had kept face down weeks ago. She scanned to the bottom and adjusted her glasses. Ms. Merrick included a specific provision addressing any challenge to this document, she said. Per her instructions, it was to be read into the record only if a contest was actually filed. That condition has been met. She cleared her throat and read. If any person named in this will directly or indirectly contests or attempts to overturn any part of it through any legal process, I direct the following. First, any gift left to that person, including the token amount, is immediately and permanently revoked, and passes instead to my granddaughter Colette, or, should she decline it, to the charitable trust described below. My mother's face drained white. Second, the judge continued. In the event of a contest brought by my daughter or her husband, I authorize and instruct my executor to release to law enforcement and to the appropriate state regulatory agencies all records attached to this will as Exhibit A. These documents concern prior financial misconduct, unpaid debts, and possible fraud involving those individuals. My estate shall fund any reasonable action to cooperate with resulting investigations. A low murmur moved through the gallery. Curtis's grip tightened around his pen until it snapped with a soft crack. Third, she read. For a period of 10 years following my death, my granddaughter is expressly forbidden from transferring, gifting, or assigning more than 1% of her inheritance, in total to my daughter or her husband, directly or indirectly. This is to make certain that no amount of pressure or guilt can ever be used to make her undo my wishes under the disguise of generosity. My breath caught. I'd known Gran wanted to protect me. I hadn't known she'd built a wall this high. Judge Vela reached the last lines, and her voice went quiet and even. If my daughter reads this and feels betrayed, I'd ask her to count how many chances she was given while I was alive. I won't sit here and watch her waste another one from the grave. Actions have consequences. This is mine. She set the paper down. For the record, the court finds that the petitioners, by filing this contest, have triggered the no contest clause. Under the explicit terms of the will, they forfeit their bequests. Those amounts pass to Ms. Hale, and the executor is authorized to proceed regarding Exhibit A. My mother lurched to her feet. Wait, she said, and her voice cracked wide open. Wait, please. She can't take everything. She knew we had problems. She was supposed to help us. This isn't fair, Mrs. Vaughn, the judge replied. Your mother had every legal right to dispose of her property as she chose. She documented her reasons and confirmed her capacity. You chose to challenge her decision after being warned of the consequences. This court enforces wills. It doesn't rewrite them. Tears spilled down my mother's face, and everything polished about her fell away, and underneath was just somebody terrified of a bill finally coming due. She turned to me. Colette, she said, hoarse, tell her you don't want this enforced. Tell her. They're going to come after us. They're going to drag everything up. Please, just give me one chance. We can figure something out. You can say you don't want the clause. Every face in the room turned to me at once, and for one heartbeat, I didn't see the woman who'd left me on a porch or dragged me into a courtroom. I saw a scared person about to reap exactly what she'd sown, and it did not make me feel powerful, it just made me tired. You can have your counsel address the court, the judge said coolly, but this clause is binding. Once triggered, it isn't a matter of Ms. Hale's preference. Mems Okafor rose. Your Honor, my client will of course comply with the terms of the will. Ms. Merrick's intentions could not be clearer. We see no legal or ethical basis to set them aside. My mother's shoulders dropped like someone had cut the strings holding her up. For the reasons stated, Judge Vela said, the petition to contest the will is denied with prejudice. The no contest clause is enforced. The executor is authorized to proceed under the instructions regarding Exhibit A. This matter is concluded. The gavel came down, one sharp final knock. My mother crumpled back into her chair with her hands over her face. Curtis sat rigid beside her, jaw locked, eyes burning like a man who'd bet everything on one hand and lost. What I felt was a tangle I couldn't name, relief so sharp it stung, grief still raw underneath, and a sick thread of guilt, because even after everything they were still mine. And now they were going to pay for their choices in ways I couldn't have softened even if I'd wanted to. But underneath all of it ran something steady and quiet, vindication. Gran had seen them clearly, she'd seen me clearly, and in the end the system had listened. Outside on the courthouse steps, the autumn air was cold and clean. My parents hurried past the few reporters and down to their leased SUV, heads down, Curtis snapping something at their lawyer. I stayed put a while, letting the pale sun sit on my face. For the first time since the phone rang before dawn, I didn't feel like I was standing in the middle of something falling apart. I felt like I was standing at the start of something I could actually build. The months after went almost exactly the way Gran must have known they would. Exhibit A turned out to be more damning than I'd imagined. Records of loans that were never repaid, emails where Curtis had coached someone into lying to investors, statements showing money quietly moved out of a small business partnership years back. Mr. Cabrera handed all of it to the authorities just as she'd instructed. Investigations opened, old business partners came forward. My parents hired good lawyers, then cheaper ones when the retainers ran dry. They sold the SUV, then the boat I didn't even know they had, then the house. I didn't go to any of the hearings. I didn't need to be there to know how they ended. There were settlements. There were fines. Eventually there was a plea deal for Curtis with probation and a restitution plan that would take him years to dig out from under. My mother wasn't charged with anything criminal, but she was named in enough civil suits that the reputation she'd spent her whole life curating simply dissolved. The people she used to impress with her clothes and her vacations stopped taking her calls. For the first time in her life, she had to live inside her means. Every so often an email would slip past my spam filter. Long, rambling ones that started in fury, slid into blame, and sometimes ended in something dressed up to look like an apology. "You didn't have to let them use that evidence," she wrote once. "You could have stopped all of this." I typed and deleted a dozen replies before I settled on the only one that was true. "I didn't start this," I wrote back. "Gran finished it. I just got out of her way." After that I set up a filter that sent anything from her into a folder I never opened. I didn't buy a big house. I moved into a small apartment in Grand Rapids with a radiator that clanked and a parking situation that was frankly a war crime, but it was mine. I went back and finished my degree, this time without ever having to choose between rent and textbooks. I met with a fee-only financial planner Mr. Cabrera trusted, and I set up the thing Gran had mentioned in the will, a charitable fund in her name, a scholarship for kids who'd aged out of foster care so they could get through school without depending on anyone who never really wanted them. Some months, when I signed the paperwork releasing a semester's tuition for a kid I'll probably never meet, I can almost hear her. "There she is, kiddo. Now you're paying attention." On the first anniversary of her death, I drove back up to Merrow Lake. The water was the same flat pewter it always was in October. The dock still had the loose board she never got around to fixing. I sat on the bench she'd built out of an old church pew, the one at the end of the yard where she used to drink her coffee and watch the herons, and I let the quiet fold around me. I thought about the courtroom, about the way her voice had cracked over the words, "Just give me one chance." Not a chance to be better, only a chance to dodge the bill. I thought about the little girl my mother must have been once, before money became the only language she was fluent in. I'll probably never know when that switch flipped in her. It aches, not knowing. But I can live with the ache. What I couldn't have lived with was letting her drag me into the same emptiness. "I miss you," I said out loud to the empty half of the bench. A little wind came off the lake and moved the reeds, carrying that green, cold, growing things smell from her old greenhouse. It was as close to an answer as I was going to get, and it was enough. I stood, brushed off my jeans, and looked around the yard one last time before I drove home. My life will always carry the shape of what my parents did. The empty chairs at every recital, the way they tried to turn a grieving woman's savings into a battlefield. But it carries the shape of what she did too. The soup on the chipped bowls, the checkbook lessons, the ruthless, loving, perfectly aimed final line on a piece of paper that turned all their greed right back on them. And driving south with the leaves coming down over the road, I realized there was one thing I'd tell anybody who's ever been ordered to forgive and forget for the sake of family. Blood is not a free pass, and the sweetest kind of justice isn't watching the people who failed you go up in flames. It's refusing quietly and for good to let them spend one more day of your life